Okay, so this is probably the most difficult study that I'm about to undertake. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're shining a spotlight on one of the most talented manga artists of our time, Yasuke Murata. From high speed football chases to epic superhero battles, his detailed and dynamic style has captured the heart of fans worldwide. He brought One Punch Man to the forefront of the manga world. Now, that series has spawned an anime and a cult of fans that just can't agree as to who can win in a fight, Goku or Saitama. I'll let you be the judge on that one. Let's dive into his journey and explore what makes his artwork so unforgettable. I will be drawing a page from my manga as a test subject just to see if we can at least capture a little bit of that Murata magic. Here's a question for you though. How do we even approach drawing something like this? I mean, this thing looks insanely impossible. Even I don't know where to start. Murata has spent decades honing his skills, and I've only started to draw professionally a few years ago. In my opinion, the key here is just to keep it simple and don't overthink it. Just approach it little by little. Think of it as if you're cooking, and your raw ingredient is your most basic foundation, but has the biggest influence on how the food is going to taste once it's cooked. It's the same with art. Big paintings like this always starts off with the most simple drawings. So I've basically boiled down his workflow into these four key elements. The first one is drawing in black and white. Drawing in black and white could prove very difficult, probably just as or even more so than fully rendered colored paintings, since you are limited to two colors. Therefore, more than ever, you must rely on implication to convey a shape. For example, in this panel of One Punch Man, we see a lot of blacks that is being used in the bottom of Boro's ship. Murata only implies these shapes by lightly highlighting them, and he does it again here with Elder Centipede's scales. It's a very common thing for artists to do, even outside of black and white. The difference here is how you approach it. For me, I like to use hatching lines. Let me show you what that means. So, I would lighten up one side of the character and then use hatching lines where the light and shadow meet to imply the transition. This gives the illusion of shape. And at this point, I don't use any gray, not unless necessary. That comes later. Next, let's talk about mastering dynamic action poses. Okay, this is the good stuff, and also probably the most challenging. It's one of my favorite parts of drawing. Murata is well known for his dynamic, fluid action scenes. To capture this, focus on learning gesture drawing. And I'm not just talking about anatomy here, although that's important too. What I used to do back in school was capture the forms and energy of ballet dancers, martial artists, and swimmers. That's because the poses that they make are so full of energy and life, and since they tend to exert their bodies to the extreme, you also get to learn how the body moves too. But don't just draw it with the forms in mind. Be sure to capture their energy too. Here's a tip. Draw with your hands very loose and draw lightly on the paper. At first, don't put too much thought if you got the drawing right. Focus on the shapes first. Here, you can see me draw fast and loose. I'm not worried about anything technical or my fundamentals right now. It's not important. That comes later. What I'm doing is capturing the motion of the pose. By drawing loosely, my hands is able to capture the direction of which the pose is moving. To warm up, I did this a couple of times and drew a lot of poses using these techniques. Probably more time than I'd like to admit, and I pretty much got lost into it, you know? And yeah, sometimes I trace too. There's nothing wrong with tracing as long as it's in the name of learning. And eventually, I became confident enough to draw something that didn't need a reference. Once you get the hang of it, and once you understand how movement in the body works, you should be able to draw any poses with a high degree of clarity. To me, this is very important because I used to just guess where everything goes. And sometimes, yeah, I would get it right and get a cool result like this. However, once I get feedback that things weren't looking right, I became really insecure with my poses. But having this knowledge gives you the confidence to know that you are actually right, and in turn, that will translate to a good drawing. Next is foreshortening. What exactly is foreshortening? Pay attention, this is important. It just means you have to create the illusion of depth. Here are some examples of foreshortened characters. So, how do we even begin to learn to draw like this? First, you need to observe how shapes work in 3 dimensions and how they interact with the camera or your point of view. For example, the closer the subject is to your point of view, the larger it appears, and vice versa. Pretty obvious stuff, but requires a lot of attention and focus when put into practice. This is a bounding box. It's basically a box that tells you where your character ends and begins in 3 dimensions. Put the box on an angle according to the perspective that you want. Use a reference at first and try to dissect where the bounding box is. So when you study, you end up with something like this. Finally, try drawing the human body as simple shapes. In this case, I'm using a circle to express the head, since a circle is so easy to put into perspective. And I'm also just starting with the head here, so I have an idea where the rest of the body goes. And just like the previous exercise, I did this a couple of times until I get the hang of it. Next is scale. When you look at Yasuke Murata's panels, it doesn't just look big, it feels impossible. This is how Murata draws scale, not through size, but through sensation. Murata understands that scale itself is the emotion of the scene. It's not about how big a monster is or how wide a city looks, it's about how it makes you feel small when you look at it. One of the ways you can achieve this is through contrast. Something only looks big when something else looks small. With that in mind, in this wide shot, I used a few of those techniques that I've mentioned. For example, I drew this massive wall in the background, contrasted with humans who are closer to the camera and therefore appear larger. You can also add an atmosphere effect like this to create a sense of depth, separating the foreground from the background even further. To amplify this sense of scale, I'm also adding in easily identifiable objects, so we can at least reference them in real life to see how big it is. I also use the same haze effect here in this bar scene from a manga to really push the foreground away from the background even further. Using these 4 things, I was able to recreate something like this on my own. What do you guys think? I know it doesn't even begin to touch the same level as the master himself. My version is a far cry. But the important part is that we've learned something today that will further our drawing skills so that maybe one day we can be closer to this art god. And finally, I drew a couple of pages of my manga using Murata's signature dynamic poses. I actually used a lot of foreshortened angles in these pages, and I gotta say, they were really difficult to pull off, but at the same time, they also bring the action to life. Definitely a very difficult art style to follow. I made no delusions of grandeur to think that I can even come close to his magnificence. However, studying his drawings really stretched my creative muscles quite a bit, especially with the foreshortened bits. Here's a side note. When you watch Attack on Titan, the scene where Levi is running away from Kenny is just full of foreshortened animation shot. Watching that really blew my mind away. Another thing that I've learned from this is that if you're having a hard time, just draw something simple and push yourself to improve little by little as you go. Anyways, like always, like and subscribe if you like this video. And if you find this helpful, please share this to a friend. And you guys have a nice day. Bye bye.